school for are thinking about changing careers. Okay, great. It seems to be a really common experience. There's one thing I'd love for you to get from the story of my experience I'd like to share is that changing careers or going into a new direction is not only possible, but the courage to do so, even when failure is a real possibility, can completely redefine your life. So I want to tell you a little bit about my story. I was born in Mexico City, and then the son of missionary parents, an American father, an Irish mother, and I moved to Argentina when I was young. Growing up as a teenager in Argentina, I really dreamed about telling stories. I wanted to make movies. I would write these grand ideas and think about how to cast my friends in them. The problem is, in the 1980s, being a missionary kid in Argentina, having access to a video camera was completely out of the question. So I had to be content with writing these ideas down and doing little storyboards and thinking about that being just kind of an impossible dream. I moved to the U.S. to study engineering. I went to Austin, Texas, and went to the University of Texas at Austin, where I studied electrical engineering and biomedical engineering. Did my master's there. I thought it would be a very practical career, something I could count on paying the bills, and it turned out to be true. But after I graduated, I got into working.
Let's use this instead.
Okay, this is having trouble.
Yeah, it's just not working. There you go.
Is that good? Is that better? Yeah. No, great. Just let me speak now. After I graduated, I went to work for a consulting company where I did a lot of software development with a graphical programming language called LabVIEW. Just curious, anybody here heard of LabVIEw? What it is? Awesome. It's a very niche programming language. It's visual and graphical. It's used for all kinds of applications where we need hardware to be controlled. So JPL and NASA used it on the Mars curiosity rover. It's been to outer space. It's used for companies that are trying to do testing systems and turn on ovens or manufacturing automation. And through my experience of developing the software language, I got to work with a lot of different companies. A lot of our clients were companies like Dell or GE or 3M. And I would learn to develop software systems for them, writing this language. I became really quite proficient at it in this little niche that I carved out for myself called LabVIEW. And one day I found myself sitting next to the editor from Prentice Hall who said, "Hey, would you like to write a book on LabVIEW?" And it really not occurred to me that I enjoy writing. I prefer fiction more than nonfiction. I said, "Yeah, sure." I had no idea how difficult it was going to be to write a 600-page volume on something I thought I knew about. Nevertheless, it was an interesting experience to write this book called LabVIEW for Everyone. It became a well-regarded book in its field, and it's gone on to be in its third edition. So this whole time, in those first 10 years of doing engineering, there was a creative part of me that was still going really missing. I knew that I still wanted to tell these stories. I didn't know how. It seemed like more than ever that the idea of transitioning from being an engineer who now had a bit of a career, a bit of reputation in this niche world, had a mortgage, 3 kids, would be just kind of a crazy idea. And I found myself shortly after the dot-com crash in 1999, working for a company that had been acquired 4 times in succession over like 18 months. So I went from working from a small engineering startup to being director of engineering for a branch office of an IT company called CompuWare, based in Detroit. And they shut down our Austin office and said, "We're moving you to Detroit." And I said, "No thanks." So at that point, I did a lot of soul searching, and it was a really scary moment, but I decided to take 6 months off and just explore this whole idea of the creative side. It seemed a little preposterous at the time, and I was 30 years old and trying to make movies with mortgage, family, kids, stopping a perfectly good engineering career. But I went out and bought a camera. I signed up for a film class. I started reading books, and I was convinced that my first short film was going to be a masterpiece, and that I would get an Oscar for it. And it was an absolute disaster. I went out, made a film, and I hope nobody ever sees it. It was pretty bad. I had even the misfortune of casting myself, which also was not good. In spite of that experience, I fortunately, for whatever reasons, decided to keep going a little further, and I formed a collective with a few other people in Austin who were also interested in learning to make films. We started this thing called Project 7. And the idea was, once you commit to this collective, you had to commit to making 7 short films over the period of a year. Each of those 7 films had a deadline, and it had a topic, sometimes something else. So at 5 p.m. on Sunday, February 23rd, whatever the deadline was, you had to show up with mini DVD back then, mini DVD tape in hand, and we would watch our films and critique it. And the idea was that this would simply be an exercise, a way to give ourselves a chance to learn the craft in a safe environment. Turned out that was one of the best things I ever did. The next film I made, which I really had no high expectations or hopes for, was this little 2-minute short comedic piece called What's Wrong with This Picture. You can find it on YouTube. But I shot it in one day in the kitchen with my son, who was 3 years old at the time. And this little film went on. It's about a stick man who comes to life, so gets his animation and live action, and steals this little boy's snack, and he goes berserk. It's very simple. I had no idea at the time that film ended up going to play at over 45 film festivals, won a bunch of awards, much to my total shock and surprise. This was right before YouTube existed, so there was a very brief period of time in the early 2000s where you could actually make money with a short film and get royalties from it. Which is crazy to think about now, but people would pay in advance to send a short film on some of these websites like Atom Films. So that little short film I made from that thing went on to make like $30,000 in royalties online. I was going to these festivals, finding this kind of whole new world of filmmaking and festivals, and then I got a call from someone who said they worked on 20th Century Fox Television, and they wanted to talk to me about writing and directing a television pilot based on my short film. And I thought at the time, surely that's a prank. Maybe you could call somebody really awesome. I don't know what agent. But it turned out it was real. It's executive at Fox. She was kind of scouting new talent that was a little bit under the radar. And I had kind of a marvelous experience of coming out to LA here and working and being mentored by some really good television writers at the time. And having somebody else pay for this whole production and getting paid to write was incredible. The television pilot did get turned into a series. It's called Except for Dan, so you won't really find it online. But it was still a great experience. And I began to see that in the filmmaking process, there was a lot of ups and downs. I made some other short films after that also kind of went nowhere. And I realized I would never be able to predict in this work what's going to hit and what's not. The point was I had to just keep making good work, or the best that I could. So I made a series of a few other films. They were just, they were interesting, maybe played some minor festivals. But then I teamed up with a producer where we wanted to make this animated film called Flatland, based on the book. Anybody here heard of Flatland? Oh wow, excellent. I read the book in high school, and Flatland, for those who don't know it, is a book written in 1882. Considered maybe perhaps the first sci-fi. It's about a world of only 2 dimensions, with the Flatlanders, with geometric shapes, circles, squares, triangles, pentagons, don't believe in the existence of the 3rd dimension. They live only on the plane of their existence until one day a being comes from spaceland and plucks a little square out to discover this whole new 3rd dimension. And he comes back to Flatland and tells everybody about this new direction called upwards, and they put him on trial for heresy. So the book has a lot of themes that resonate politically. It also does a lot with mathematics. This is kind of a fascinating story. We wanted to adapt this into a film. It was clearly going to be animated still when you could make a movie like this. And at the time I wrote my dream cast. I'd never worked with any known actors. And my previous work, I said, really, for the grandfather who was going to be the square, I'd like to get Martin Sheen. For the young girl, I'd like to get Kristen Bell. And I had no idea how we were going to do that. But we were fortunate a year later to have gotten the script to Martin Sheen, and he asked me how to make that happen. And it really had to do with just getting to know enough people through the years of working in the film business, helping other people do enough favors that some people were kind of do favors for me. And I remember getting a phone call one day and saying, "Jefferson, it's Martin, I made the script, come up, we'll do it next week." So we started working with him, and suddenly all the other actors' schedules mysteriously opened up once he was on board. And I found myself in this kind of crazy place, directing these actors who had far more experience than I did in their business, their industry. But it was a really high moment for me, realizing that Eric and this engineers thinking that making movies is going to be impossible. Working with some very talented people and making a film. Flatland is one of those that we had no idea again what was going to happen, but it went on to be remarkably successful for being a half-hour animated short film. And half-hour movies really are a weird way to catch. It's not a feature film. It's kind of long. It's not something you would watch on YouTube. But we found that in the educational market, a lot of school districts love showing this movie. So we sell the movie ourselves. It's been a thriving little side business. We have no middleman. We sell the movie on our website as DVD or downloads. We do have some distributors, but we have kept all the rights. And for the last 7 years, it's sold over 6 figures every single year. And it's just kind of one of these things that keeps going. It's spawned a sequel. There was a book that was redone with a movie graphics in it. There was a ride in Orange County that was also designed based on Flatland. And somebody optioned the rights to the movie version of it. And I share all that, not to boast, but just because it was, I look back and think about that first initial step of something that seemed crazy, which is writing these ideas on the whiteboard. And looking back 7 years later, not having been able to predict how this could have happened. As I was making these films, I knew my ultimate goal was really to make a feature film. I felt like as a filmmaker, I needed that to feel a certain sense of accomplishment, and some of the stories I wanted to tell were feature length. So I again set out to make a feature and realized how difficult it was to raise money for that. And, anybody here in the film business or trying to make films, so you guys know how hard that is to persist and do that. I was fortunate enough to get my first feature done, shot in 2010. It took 4 years to finish it. Came out last year and got distribution in a few countries overseas as well as locally. By a company called E1. So played in a few theaters. It's on Amazon, iTunes, so on. It's called Dragon Day. It's a sci-fi thriller. It was a great experience. I did find that as I was making these films, I was challenged. I now have 4 kids. I need to figure out why that was happening. But as I had this responsibility of providing for a large family and making these films, I would find myself doing these gigs in between movies where my old engineering clients would still call me and say, hey, we still have this software system where we develop this. A lot of them knew I was a filmmaker, so I started getting some calls and requests from clients like John Deere or Chevron, who have been worked for, saying, could you shoot these, we had to say for this webisode we want to do, or a marketing video. And I would do some of that for them. And eventually, some of that work led to these interactive, they said, we want to do this interactive kind of video rather than something just static for our marketing or our trade shows. We want to do some kind of maybe video game. And I never played video games, I never really was into that, but they had this idea for a video game, and I took that a step further. I said, why don't, instead of just the game, we use your actual product interface with it, rather than just use a joystick or game controller. Let's take your John Deere tractor and let's wire it up so that people can actually sit on it, use the steering wheel, use the pedals, the ignition key, the horn, and be driving in this story-driven world. Let's put the whole thing on a motion platform too, so it moves. And of course, then they got the budget and a little scared. But they fortunately proved it, and this motion simulator game ride turned out to be a big hit for them. They've taken it around to these trade shows, and it turns out that every year for the last 6 years, they keep requesting some version of this to be made. At the time, I kept thinking these were just these little distracting gigs. I was like, I want to get back to making films. That's just something I'll go do, and I'll come back and need some money. But then I started having other companies call and say, hey, we saw that experience, that simulator game, can you build one for us? And I got to the point where I just didn't have the capacity to keep taking it on. And this led to where I'm at now, which is founding Positron. Positron is a company that I formally started a year ago, and basically realized there was a demand for these very niche kind of experiences that bring engineering and creative together. And so, Positron, we work a lot with emerging technologies to create interactive and immersive experiences. Motion simulators is one thing we do, but we also work a lot with virtual reality and holograms. So it's kind of all the fun, geeky stuff for my engineering was kind of way back along with the creative stuff. And I found that this was really a perfect marriage of the two. I started Positron about a year ago, and we were able to raise some funding as well that closed a couple months ago. So we have an office here in Glendale, not here, but as well as an office in Brooklyn, New York. And it's one of the things I realized was that taking that leap has also been another scary leap because I don't have a business background. It's been kind of a baptism by fire of learning, getting my MBA by trial in this process. But it's been great. You know, we've had some up and downs, and now I find myself building this company where we get to do both the creative and engineering come together. So I guess I want to share 4 points I think that I've learned through this process of leaving careers. And I'm going to need a consultant notes just to make sure I don't screw these up. But the first point I want to share is that I've learned is nobody gives you permission. I spent a long time thinking and dreaming about making films when I was an engineer. And I remember going to South by Southwest Film Festival and sitting in the shorts films program, watching these shorts wrap up with their credits and thinking, I really would like to have a film here. I realized I kept waiting for somebody to say, you can do it, or validate that, or give me something. And I found realized nobody's really going to do that for me. I just had to jump out and do it. You can't wait for permission. And so I found myself a year later in the same theater at South by Southwest watching my movie come up. And that was a very gratifying experience of building that confidence. No, nobody's going to give me permission. Second point is I have a good friend who has this phrase. He says, something begets something. And I think what he means is the idea that one of the most important characteristics I felt for success is that if you just start doing work. A lot of times I would get wrapped up with worries about how am I going to market this, or how am I going to find funding or investors, or all these other things. But there's something about you just choose to do something small and just take that first step of doing the actual work. So if you want to write, you start writing. If you want to make a film, make a film. If you want to start a company, write that business plan and start the company. All that other stuff is going to have to be figured out and will come later. But just doing that first work, just like making those first short films, I didn't know which one was going to hit or lead to a film career, but just making them is what mattered. Third point that I want to share is that bring all of your past skills and experience to the next step, to the next career. I think one of the mistakes I made when I went into filmmaking is I was a little bit reluctant to share, once I arrived in LA, that I was an engineer. I felt that fear I think that every artist has, that they're going to be discovered out as a fraud, that they're not really talented, or don't have any creativity. And I felt that being an engineer was something I needed to leave completely in the past. As I went along, I realized that the more I could bring those experiences and my interest and love of technology and how it affects us and our relationship to technology, that ended up working its way into the films that actually did well for me are the ones where I brought that in, as well as the films that required some technical knowledge on my part. So one of the things I learned, and now of course with Positron, I'm bringing all these skills to bear. So that's a big lesson for me is don't just discard and put back and say I'm moving on completely. That's just going to make you unique. That's just going to bring your special sauce. Fourth and final point is I think in making a big leap, you need traveling companions. You need people that can be your community or support you or accountability. I remember when I was struggling to finish the script for Flatland, I would meet with a friend of mine, and we agreed to for 30 days, every single day, we were going to meet at the Starbucks near our place in Austin at 5:30 in the morning. We both had to be at work by 9 at our day jobs. And so for 3.5 hours, we would sit and write with each other. First few days were great, full of energy. By the second week, it totally sucked at 5 a.m. But knowing that he was going to be there, and knowing he would call me out if I wasn't, and vice versa, we kind of, by the end of 30 days, and with our quadruple shot lattes, managed to get our drafts done. What was really gratifying is that by sheer coincidence, 3 years later, both of our movies premiered the same weekend. And so we were able to go to the same Starbucks and have a little celebration of what we've done. I think if I had not had some of these traveling companions, some of that change would not have happened. But kind of to wrap up, I just want to say the story of Flatland is a story about discovering new worlds that we didn't think were possible. And I hope that's been an inspiration for me in my life and storytelling and making these leaps. So I hope that in your own journey you can leap and discover an inner new world that you didn't think previously was possible. All right, thank you very much.
Great presentation. We're going to open up to Q&A. So I'll pass the mic to John. Raise your hand if you have a question. We'll pass the mic to you. Stand up, say your name, what your company is. Let's leave this to just questions for Jeffrey. Let's try and leave commentary for after the event. So here we go.
A great talk, very entertaining and very inspiring. And My question is, when you take your leap of faith and you have 4 kids with a wife, and how do you manage to convince your wife that you can?
How about manage with the wife?
Yeah, and also money. Yeah.
Right. Good question. Well, I mean, that may not be my best success story. I'm divorced now, but I don't think it's actually for really good reasons. At the time, I had a very understanding wife. She was very adventurous. I think if I had not been married to that person, I wouldn't have been able to do it. I think also talking about traveling companions, if you're married to your significant other, it's not on board with it. I think it'd be really, really difficult to do. Unfortunately, she was.
How about money-wise? How did you handle the money side?
On the money side, especially my wife didn't work, so I was the sole provider for our family, and it was just this crazy. Every month, I've spent the last 15 years never having had a regular day job or a regular employment. So it's for me, it's a bit of freelancing, finding these gigs, kind of taking that step. Once some of the movies like Flatland made a little money, that gave me some platform. But that is part of the scary leap. It's like there is no financial security. Sure.
I know.
Good morning again. It's always fun to hear. I was an engineer and music student, so in my career sort of swung back and forth a few times between tech. Your experience as an engineer and quote unquote creative starting a company, the new startup. Could you talk a little bit about the counterintuitive lessons that you encountered? There's the obvious stuff like, well, I need to do accounting, I need to do this, but how about the stuff that totally, took a total attack in a very different direction from what your intuition told you was right?
In terms of starting a company now, of course, that would be different than my intuition. I think that's a good question. Let me think about that a second. I think one of the most surprising things for me was that I didn't have to figure out everything myself. I think as an engineer, I felt like I have to do everything. I have to learn all the accounting. I have to learn how to do all the cash flow and financials. And it is important. It is important to have some grasp of that. But I was quickly, I learned in person that I was going to burn out and quickly kill myself if I tried to do everything. There are people who love doing it. There are people who love doing cash flow things. And it's about finding those people and partnering with them. And for me at least, it wasn't something that was obvious, intuitive. It was, maybe for other people.
Hi, Mike Lanzarotta, NAI Capital Commercial Real Estate. You based your movie Flatland on a book from 1880. Did you have to deal with trademarks, copyrights, securing the rights, and all that?
No. The book not only would be in the public domain, so that was one of the reasons we did it. Is we were a young producer and director and said, what property do we not have to pay?
Any more questions?
Hey, I just have a question about your transition from engineering to movie VR. I kind of feel like I'm doing the opposite, where I used to be in visual effects, and then to get stability, I figured I'd have to become a software engineer. Like that's the trip that I took. But really, like my passion is creating stories, making movies, and doing that kind of stuff. But how did you, can you just explain a little more on that transition by yourself? Was there anything like really going up against you that made that hard?
Yeah, I think what was going on, so the question I guess is like that transition between, say, engineering and filmmaking or something creative, what were the going up against? I think the tension is always, there's always this, something here that pays a lot of money, and then there's something here really creative that pays no money. And how much can you do of each, or where do you land on that spectrum? Yeah, for me it was, I think one of the things I tried to learn to do was to be really diligent about if I was going to save some of my time to do creative work, like say spending 3.5 hours every morning writing a script. I couldn't go work a job that was 60 hours a week where I couldn't take on projects that weren't profitable. So I started getting really ruthless about I'm only going to freelance on projects that pay really, really well and I can control some of the hours and don't get too crazy. And making some hard choices, turning down work I might have wanted to do, but knowing that this time I had to carve out and I had to draw a box and a boundary around my creative time and treat it just like a job. This morning's writing became a discipline even though I had no boss to report to. So I guess I would say it is possible to do both, but it is hard. It is hard.
You've had an interesting career as an engineer to filmmaker and some of the other things that you've talked about. It seems like at this point in your career now, you started a company, and so you're the founder, CEO, president.
Right.
It seems like now you kind of tied down where you're accountable on a daily basis as opposed to a freelancer and doing whatever it is that you like to do. How has that been a challenge for you?
Oh, great question. Yeah, that's a very good question. It took me a long process to the point where I was comfortable with the idea of starting a company because it occurred to me many times. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to keep the freedom of being able to just be a freelancer, make my films, work on stuff. It finally came down to realizing that there was always a little bit of this, constant tension of I can do this and make some money, then I can go work on something creative, and these other balance. I had a business mentor I met that really is kind of part of what changed my life. I should share this story, but this business mentor in Colorado that I met, he really he wrote this book, which I highly recommend anybody who's thinking about starting a business or if you have a startup. It's called Making Money That's Killing Your Business. It's a fantastic book. And it's basically the idea that the more you're focusing on just trying to make money, you're going to be on this treadmill. And you don't want to focus on making money, you want to focus on making a business that makes you money, that buys you freedom. So part of the motivation for starting the company was that, hey, I may have to do this full time, I am tied down, I am daily accountable, I'm not doing anything else but my role as CEO of Positron right now. But the hope is in 2 or 3 years, maybe a little more, I can step back in the day-to-day, or it can be sold, it can be a cash machine. Sort of hoping this would be a trust fund that will allow me to go back and do more creative work and just personal projects. So.
I'm Doreen Chen.
Doreen, can you
I
hold
went
that?
from being a physicist engineer to now producing books.
Oh, wow.
But
Very
the
cool.
question I have is, how are you going to encourage
Use the microphone.
people,
A little bit closer.
Repeat the question, please.
I would
how
encourage
are you
people.
going to hiring people to join your company, and how are you going to encourage them to be creative?
Oh, good question. Yes, the question was how am I going to hire people in the company and encourage them to be creative? As everyone I hire, I do have a criteria that one of the things we want is for them to be very creative. And that's hard to measure sometimes, but even we have people that work with engineers, mechanical, electrical engineers, as well as game artists, 3D artists. So for the people that are engineers, I look for just what is their interest outside of their work. I'm not only interested in how to get engineering, but I want to know what kind of creative work are you interested in, or what do you do outside of work. So most of the engineers who work for us typically are also musicians or have done just even some of their own maker-type projects outside of work. I think looking for that. The other thing we do is we are getting soon to the point where we want to encourage people to pursue their own projects internally. So we have established, I guess some other companies have done this too, where 10 to 20% of your time you can work on whatever you want. We're taking a little bit of that. So every week we have a little update of here's, we have like 4 internal projects right now that are not ready. Customers will just say, we're going to make these, and they can come from anybody. They can be suggested, you can find our assistant or anybody in the company. And we just want to really encourage that I guess, culture of creativity. So.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey.
Thanks.
You have a great career, and we've got a room full of innovators, entrepreneurs, decision makers in the community. What kinds of things can we do to help you in any way?
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. What you can help me is we are hiring. So we're looking for Unity game developers, if anybody knows them or is interested in working with Positron. We're looking for systems engineers too, so if you are a mechatronics engineer, that's one of the biggest needs right now. But yeah.
Okay, great. And then last part of the meeting, let me have you stand right here and let me get a quick selfie of you. There you go. Okay, and everybody, let's get a nice photo bomb of this. Okay, your marks, get set, go. Yes. Oh no, I'm doing video. Hang on.
It's like a movie.
Yeah, we just made a movie. It's your next feature.